Hey folks, welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at adding some paper textures to spruce up this background that we created in the previous video. So here's what we're going to need. We're going to need some really high quality watercolor paper textures. You can find these on various design sites. I'll put links to a few of those in the description for this video. But these are basically high resolution files, and you can work with these and create some really amazing results. So you can just simply drag and drop these, which I've already done, and you can see in my layer palette here I've got this texture that's just sitting here, and we're going to take this texture, we can add other textures to create some really interesting effects, and we can rotate and work with this texture in very interesting ways, and I want to share that with you. So we're going to take this texture and we're going to just move it over to the far right hand side, and I'm not going to do the entire composition here. I will show you what the final result looks like at the end of the video, but this is just more along the lines of a tutorial on how to use textures effectively, specifically these watercolor textures. So let's start off by taking a look at our composition. We have this tree here, and I want to go ahead and use this texture for that tree. So I'll just scroll down here, I'll go to the layer that contains my tree. If I hold down the Command key and click on Windows, if you hold the Control key and click on the thumbnail preview for the layer, it will select that specific layer, and I'm going to go back up to my watercolor paper texture and hit Command J. And what that does is it will jump that selection onto its own layer, and you can see that that is exactly what we're seeing here. And the next step here is I want to move this layer down. So if I hold down the Control or Command left bracket key, I can move this texture layer down to where it's sitting right above the layers that I created for my tree trunk. Now I can choose something like multiply, and right away you can see the effect that I'm getting here. This now has a much more, kind of like grainy, earthy type of look. It looks more like an actual wooden tree. And I didn't even color this. I'm simply taking that texture and applying it directly over top. Now, that works when I've got a texture that's roughly brown and very earth tone. That works really great for things like tree trunks. But you can also take this same texture and you can alter its color as well. So let's take a look and see how we can continue to exploit this. So let's just take our texture now, and I like to periodically rotate the texture to make it more interesting. I don't want it to be like the same texture everywhere. Sometimes I'll alter the color, and one really cool tip is if you just toggle this off, the next thing I want to do is I want to work on that rock. So I'll go to the layer that contains the rock, and that would be, let's see. Here we go. There's our rock. So if I Command click on the rock, I've made that selection. Now I'll go up to my texture layer and I'll hit Command J. And what that does is it takes that selection and puts it on its own layer. Now I can hide the texture once again. You can see that it's encompassing the entire rock. And if I use the Command left bracket key, I can move it down to where it's directly over the rock layer. And let's now change this. We can use multiply, that could work. We could also use overlay or soft light if we're trying to go ahead and play with some of those values. You can just see what these different layer styles will do. You're just going to have to experiment and see what works best for your composition. In my case, I'm going to leave it as multiply, and what I'll do is I'll tweak the color. If I hit Command U, then I can adjust the hue. So I want to make this a little bit more reddish, and I can click OK. So you can do that. You can take the existing texture and you can modify its properties using the hue and saturation palette. And right away what you can see here is that this has kind of a more earth tone look to it. It looks a little bit more complex, looks a little bit more nuanced. Now, you can repeat and reuse this texture just by simply rotating it, flipping it, etc. I'll just do this one more time, and I want to kind of describe the strategy that I've got going on here. The next thing I want to do is I want to deal with the leaves on this tree that's in the foreground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this texture in such a way that it roughly matches the shape. It's not going to be totally perfect, but you can see that the shape that I have of this texture here roughly conforms to the shape of the leaves that are on this tree. So with that said and done, I'm just going to position it like so, hit enter, and I'll just move it like this, and I'll go to the layer that contains the leaves. So let's see where that is. There we go. And I just, I want to save that selection because I want to adjust the texture. Here's how you do that. If you go to select and you go to save selection, I'll just call this tree leaves. And now I can deselect it by hitting Command D. And let's just drop the opacity just a smidge so we can kind of easily position this texture. I'll move it like that. That seems pretty good. I'll bring the opacity back up. I'll put it back to 100%. And then that selection that I've saved, I need to load. So if I go now to select, choose load selection, I will go to the tree leaves channel that I saved previously and click OK. And you can see that that selection shows right back up. Command J, I can hide the texture now. And let's move the texture down. I'll just go ahead and drag this just for convenience. Just move it down like so. And I can set this to, I'll just choose soft light. And I don't want the leaves to be brown. I want them to be in a more of a greenish color. So I'll hit Command U. And I'll adjust the hue. I don't want it to be super bright. So I can play with the hue. I can play with the saturation. I don't want it to be super saturated. That looks pretty good, and I can continue on from there. So that's the basic strategy here. You want to look at the textures that you're working with and see if you can conform their shapes in such a way that you're using the texture effectively. You just don't want to apply a texture over the whole thing and then just, you know, change the layer style, because that'll look like you put a texture on top of your image. If you do this right, in my opinion, it won't look like you've used a texture. It'll be very difficult to tell. So I hope you found some value in this video. Stick around here. I'll go ahead and show you what the finished result looks like with just the textures alone. And once again, I'll put some links to some design sites where you can find these types of textures. As always, thanks for watching. If you get some value, hit the like button. If you haven't already considered subscribing, hopefully this video will convince you to do the same. And check out the other videos that I've also made with regards to making backgrounds. I think you might find some extra value there too. As always, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.